Hi, happy Monday, everybody. This is Beth Knaus of That's a Spade Copywriting Services and the co-host of Unmute Yourself, the podcast. And wanted to give you some words of wisdom for your coming week that I think you could probably use personally and professionally. So on the podcast this week and last week, actually, is it that? No, last week, the last 2 weeks. Tomorrow we have a new podcast episode coming out and it's different. But the previous 2 weeks were about boundaries, right? One was about boundaries at home and in your personal relationships, and the other was at work. And so that led me to having some conversations with people about change. And so I feel like we see change in two different ways, these two different extremes. And it's no wonder to me that people will say they don't like change. So for instance, right now, you might see a lot of people changing their social media and leaving Facebook and Instagram and going over to TikTok, right? And so if you could imagine, this can become like a volley back and forth. And we have this panic because we don't really know where we should be or where we want to be. And so we follow other people that we respect, but that doesn't mean that they have the same clients or that they have the same skills or passion about these different platforms. So that seems to be a change I see people make really quickly, right? Because it's prompted by peer pressure and it's prompted by panic. And that's just one example of it. The second example is change that seems to be taking a really long time, archaic change. And I think this tends to be a little bit more in the corporate sector and also personally, right? So I feel like I had a conversation with a friend and colleague this morning, and we were talking about how, 20 years ago in corporate, you didn't set a boundary and say, well, I'm leaving at 5:00. Because if you were, let's say, particularly a woman, this might have happened to men too, but I just haven't had anyone say this to me. But if you were, the woman and you were young and single, you were expected to stay late because, like the male executives, and most executives were male at that point, nobody's fault. Well, it was, we won't get into that. And they had a family, and so they had a right to leave. If anybody was going to leave early, it was going to be them. And I'm sure that went for anybody who was in, I got an itchy nose. I'm going to fight with somebody over this. It could be anybody who was in the lower ranks, right? But it just 20 years ago tended to be women. And there was that, we didn't have official family leave at that time. We didn't have, we just didn't have the parameters around self-preservation, right? Or the concerns for mental health. It was just you went to work and you worked for as long as they told you to work. And now, like with changes in hours and flex time and hybrid and working from home, that's become a little less stressful and you can set boundaries, right? And sometimes that boundary is, I didn't work this Wednesday because I had an appointment, but I'm going to work on Saturday, right? And that didn't happen either if companies weren't open. So, and you had no access to work at home. So those changes took a much longer time. And I think that changes that are derived from family tradition and history and what you've been taught in your bubble, maybe what status you grew up in, or there's certain stereotypes with all those things and we carry them, right? And they're really hard to change because it's really hard for us to look at our siblings and our parents and our extended families and say, I'm going to step out and separate myself because I know that worked and it seems to work for them, but it doesn't work for me right now. And I'm an entrepreneur, right? And I'm not somebody who, is a teacher in a union, or I'm not a doctor or a lawyer, or I'm not a plumber or an electrician, or, I don't do these other things. I'm not a nurse. I'm not, a number of other things. I work for myself. And a lot of the reasons we work for ourselves is for change. Now, as a content writer and a copywriter, why am I talking to you about that? Because content changes. And I know sometimes people are like, oh God, I have to change my content. But change signals growth and expansion, and it signals learning and open-mindedness. And there are a lot of things around us that can trigger our need for change in our content. So it can be feedback that you get from peers or from clients. It can be conversations that you have and who you're having them with, right? It can be the media and what the media is doing. It can be that you're taking a course and you learn something about your content or how you want to change your content, or inspiration, right? Like 2 weeks ago, I went to a wonderful 2 day like intensive retreat with a coach, and it was great. And I came home with all these content ideas. But that means that, it's great to have a content bank, but you can't flood everybody with a bajillion ideas. You have to really define which of those ideas really represent you. And sometimes they change. So just keep that in mind. It's okay. Change is good. And so I recently created a brand new lead generator, a brand new freebie, and it is a checklist of all the places a business owner needs to have content for. Right. And it's a very overwhelming list. But what I did in the list was break it up to, what do you write daily? What do you write weekly? What do you have to look at quarterly or biannually or once a year or never again? And then you can look at that and you can say, okay, I need to focus on this writing daily or this writing weekly, so on and so on. So it's really helpful. I will drop the link with this video. And if you're interested in having that checklist for reference, you can sign up and get that checklist. And I'm open to any questions about it. Also open to talking to you about, how much content do you need? What of your content needs to be changed or left alone, or even just to chat at all and get to know each other. So I hope you guys have a great week. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Remember all the things you have to be grateful for and the things that other people gave up so that we could have that gratitude. And I will see you next week.